As we gather today, let us remember that we in the Diocese of Northern Michigan acknowledge the sacred land where we work, live, teach, learn, and build community. This land is the territory of the Anishinaabe people. We recognize the repeated violations of sovereignty, territory, and water perpetrated by European and other settlers that have impacted the original inhabitants of this land. We extend our respect to citizens of these First Nations people who live here and their ancestors who have lived here for over 500 generations, and to all Indigenous people. We also know that this acknowledgement is insufficient. It does not undo the harm that has been done and continues to be perpetrated now against Indigenous people, their land, air, and water.
Shepherd us, O God, beyond our wants, beyond our fears, from death into life. Shepherd us, O God, shepherd us beyond our wants, beyond our fears, from death to life. Shepherd us, O God, shepherd us beyond our wants, beyond our fears, from death to life. Shepherd us, O shepherd us beyond our wants, beyond our fears, from death to life. Shepherd us, O shepherd us beyond our wants, beyond our fears, from death to life. Shepherd us, O shepherd us beyond our wants, beyond our fears, from death to life.
A reading from the Gospel according to John. Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper opens the door for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the door for the sheep. All who came before are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to kill and steal and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Here ends the reading. Imagine you are in a mid-sized town on the eastern shore of the ancient Mediterranean Sea. The sun has just risen, and you can already feel its heat on your face when you pass between the long shadows of the houses. It's going to be a long day with a long journey ahead of you. First, though, you must collect the sheep. You're just one of the shepherds for your community, but you're a good one. You take pride in your work. The people appreciate it, and you actually care for their sheep. In fact, you're excited to get started with them. It's the heat of summer, and good pasture is getting harder and harder to find. But you know the perfect spot, and it should still be quite green, even this time of year. And there's shelter nearby. If you can be the first to get to it, it will be yours for the night. So the porter, who lives beside the communal sheep pen so that he can keep an eye on it at night, can probably hear your eagerness as you call out to him. He recognizes your voice, of course. You've been doing this for years. He opens the gate to the pen and you call out, "Ha, ha, ta'o, ta'o." There are other sheep here, sheep that other families have entrusted to other shepherds. But the sheep that are in your charge immediately recognize the sound of your voice, even though many of the other shepherds use these same words. They separate themselves from the others and they come running, as eager as you are to get to fresh food and water. The whole journey you're on guard, keeping a close eye out for bandits, lions, bears, whatever else may threaten your flock. Finally, you arrive at the shelter, which looks something like this. It's fortunately unoccupied. You'll have to stay there tonight because the pasture that you've led them to is nearly a full morning's journey from the village, so you wouldn't make it back to the village before nightfall in time for them to graze. After they've eaten and drunk their fill, you lead them back here as the sun is setting. After you herd them into the enclosure, you sit down in the doorway, right here, and you light a fire in front. And as the stars emerge, you lie down across the threshold and drift to sleep. This is the scene we're meant to have in mind when we read this passage in John, according to Kenneth Bailey, who includes these details in his compendious book, The Good Shepherd, a 1,000-year journey from Psalm 23 to the New Testament. Now, I think this book is required reading for anyone who wishes to deepen their understanding of what is surely one of the most widespread metaphors used in our faith. The Good Shepherd was, in fact, one of the most popular symbols of Christianity before the cross began to be popularized in the 4th century. Christian tombs in the 1st centuries never had crosses marking them. Instead, we see fishes, grapevines, and most of all, shepherds. That's why still to this day we use language deriving from shepherding for the activities of the church. Pastoral care and even the title pastor both come from the Latin word for a shepherd. And it's not uncommon, if a bit old-fashioned, to hear a priest refer to her flock to mean the congregation she serves. Congregation itself, in fact, comes from a Latin word for a flock of animals. So it's fitting that here in the heart of the Easter season, which is the heart of the Christian year, we celebrate Good Shepherd Sunday, focusing our readings on passages that illustrate this metaphor for who God is and who Christ is and how we are called to be as leaders in the churches and in our communities. I think the danger of this popularity, though, is that it can create a kind of shallow familiarity. We're so used to these images that we think we know what they mean, and so we ignore their more profound implications. I know that although I recite Psalm 23 pretty often, I seldom reflect on what it might mean that the psalmist, perhaps King David himself, thought of God as a shepherd and what that might reveal about who God is and how she acts in the world. I know, too, that although people do sometimes call me pastor, and although I often describe activities as pastoral, I don't usually consider that these are titles drawn from shepherding, let alone reflect on what that might mean for how I'm supposed to think and pray and behave in relationship to others. So it's also good to take this yearly opportunity to remember what it means that Jesus identifies himself with that good shepherd of Psalm 23, and to see if we can't find something new or remember something we've forgotten to carry into our practice of our faith this week and moving forward. In that spirit, what surprised me this week, and not for the first time, is that Jesus doesn't actually say he's the good shepherd, at least not in the reading we just heard. Now, partly this is an accident of how the lectionary is set up. The folks who planned our readings wanted to split up this passage in John's Gospel, the so-called Good Shepherd discourse, into 3 chunks, so that one chunk of it could be read on the 4th Sunday of Easter every year of a 3-year cycle. Now this fragments what was surely never meant to be fragmented this way, so that we don't actually hear John 10:11 when Jesus actually says, "I am the good shepherd," and then adds, "The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." We won't actually hear that until next year. But perhaps this is a happy accident, because this year it allows us to focus on what is, I think, too often a neglected part of this teaching. See, before he identifies with the shepherd, Jesus actually identifies with the door of the sheepfold. Now, we might miss this if we know, or if we have in our minds, that Jesus is about to say, just a few verses later, "I am the good shepherd." The shepherd metaphor eclipses the door metaphor, and so the door metaphor remains unexplored. Now, why this happens, I don't know. Perhaps it's just easier to imagine Jesus as a shepherd than as a door. It's certainly easier to paint him that way. I've seen many, many icons and stained glass windows of Jesus as a shepherd, but I don't think I've ever seen one that tried to make him look like a door. But the effect is that we end up ignoring this metaphor and focusing on the shepherd metaphor, unless we can find a way to make the door metaphor part of the shepherd metaphor. Now, that's what Kenneth Bailey has done in documenting the scene that I asked you to imagine yourself in at the start of this reflection. You see, these sorts of sheep enclosures, like the image I showed, are still in use in the Near East, and they're very ancient. Now, the picture I showed is a modern photograph, but there are traces of these going back millennia. As you saw, the enclosure has no door, no gate. The shepherd himself or herself must become the door in order to protect the sheep and to keep them from straying out. But in that case, there's also no doorkeeper, since the shepherd also has this function. So the verses don't fit the ones at the beginning of this passage, unless, as Bailey suggests, we're talking about two different types of enclosures and two different scenes. The first one in the village, where the sheep are kept in a common pen under the watch of a doorkeeper, and the second one in the wilderness, where the shepherd becomes the door. I find it pretty convincing, though I must admit that I still have questions. And one of those questions is why Jesus even bothers saying, "I am the door," if the door and the shepherd are really one and the same. Why call our attention to his doorness at all? And in a way, it doesn't really matter whether Bailey is right or not, because what we're asked to consider again today is not only that Jesus identifies his own and God's activity with the actions of a good shepherd, but that an aspect of that activity, an aspect that's important enough for him to draw our attention to it quite explicitly, is that he also acts as a door. What can this mean? Once again, I don't know, but I think it's worth reflecting on. What does it mean to be a door? First, I think Jesus tells us that no one who tries to get through somewhere other than the door has the welfare of the sheep in mind. Shortcuts, in other words, are red flags. There's one way to keep people safe. Now, to reach the safety of the enclosure, if you're a sheep, you have to use the door, but also, this is more interesting to me today, we can trust that the enclosure is safe because it has such a sturdy door. Now, the second thing I think we might reflect on is that Jesus tells us that the door doesn't open to people who aren't supposed to get in. Only those that have an established relationship with the sheep thereafter will get the door to open. And at that point then, and this is a further reflection, at that point, the sheep are perfectly safe to sally forth because the door has defended them from any evil intentions. But it's also important, I think, to point out that they do sally forth, that the enclosure, the safety of the pen is not meant to be their whole life forever and ever. When the door lets someone through, it also lets them, the sheep, out to follow. And it's by their leaving the greater safety of the pen that they have access to this life and abundance that Jesus promises. So what do we make of all this? I think we could imagine that this might be read as a statement about the exclusivity of Christianity, about how one can only access safety, another word for which is salvation, through Christ, or about the importance of the church in providing access to abundant life. But I don't think I hear it that way. Instead, I hear it as a message of hope, of courage, of trust. The world outside might seem scary, but there's a solid door protecting us. And that same door invites us out under the watchful eye of the Good Shepherd. And it's out there that we find life and abundance. The thieves and pretenders and wild things, they've tried to find a way around the door, but they've failed, and they'll always fail. Which means the only real danger to us is that we become like them, seeking our own advantage and security, rather than following the familiar voice of the ones we love to new pastures, new possibilities, to life lived abundantly. And in this hope, in this trust, may we not rest, but rather go forth with courage to shepherd the flocks that have been entrusted to us, to share this abundant life that we've been blessed with. Amen.
I cannot dance, I cannot dance, I cannot dance unless you lead me. I cannot dance, I cannot dance, I cannot dance unless you lead me. I cannot dance, I cannot dance, I cannot dance unless you lead me. I cannot dance, I cannot dance, I cannot dance unless you lead me. I cannot dance, I cannot sing, I cannot dance, I cannot sing unless you teach me your love. I cannot sing, I cannot sing unless you teach me your love. I cannot sing, I cannot leave, I cannot leave unless you hold me your love. I cannot sing, I cannot leave, I cannot leave unless you hold me your love. I cannot sing, I cannot leave, I cannot leave unless you hold me your love. I cannot sing, I cannot leave, I cannot leave unless you hold me your love. I cannot sing, I cannot leave, I cannot leave unless you hold me your love.